What happens when two of the most outspoken women in media collide on live television? When Meghan McCain sits across from Meghan Markle on The View, the sparks that fly are nothing short of explosive. Today, we're diving into the most jaw-dropping confrontation that had viewers glued to their screens and social media buzzing for weeks. If you want to see how this unfolds, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below with your thoughts, because this story is absolutely wild. The tension in the studio was palpable from the moment Meghan Markle walked onto The View set. She moved with the practiced grace of someone who had spent years in the spotlight. First as an actress, then as a member of the British royal family, and now as a media mogul in her own right. Her arrival was meant to promote her latest philanthropic initiative. But what unfolded would become one of the most memorable moments in daytime television history. Meghan McCain, never one to shy away from controversy, sat at the panel table with a look that could only be described as predatory. She had been waiting for this moment, this opportunity to face off with someone who represented everything she believed was wrong with modern celebrity culture. The other hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, Sarah N., and Sunny Host, seemed to sense the brewing storm. Their usual pre-show banter replaced by an almost electric anticipation. The interview began innocuously enough. Whoopi introduced Meghan Markle with the standard pleasantries, highlighting her humanitarian work and recent projects. Markle responded with her characteristic poise, speaking about her passion for women's rights and social justice. Her voice carried that familiar blend of American directness and British refinement that had made her such a polarizing figure in the media landscape. "Thank you so much for having me," Markle said, her smile never wavering despite the obvious tension she must have felt. "I'm thrilled to be here to discuss the work we're doing with our foundation and how we can continue to make a positive impact in communities around the world." Joy Behar jumped in with a softball question about Markle's transition from acting to advocacy, giving her an easy opportunity to discuss her journey. Markle handled it expertly, weaving in personal anecdotes about her childhood and her mother's influence on her commitment to service. The conversation flowed smoothly, almost too smoothly, as if everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Sarah N. asked about the challenges of raising children in the public eye, a topic that seemed safe enough. Markle's response was measured and thoughtful, discussing the importance of privacy while acknowledging the platform that comes with public life. She spoke about wanting to give her children a normal childhood, while also teaching them about their privilege and responsibility. "I think every parent wants to protect their children," Markle explained, her hands gesturing gracefully as she spoke. "But we also recognize that we have a unique opportunity to show them how they can use their voice for good. It's about finding that balance between protection and preparation." Sunny Hostin nodded along, asking a follow-up question about specific initiatives they were working on for children's welfare. Markle's answer was detailed and passionate, showcasing her deep knowledge of the issues and her genuine commitment to making a difference. She spoke about literacy programs, mental health resources, and the importance of early childhood development. Throughout these exchanges, Meghan McCain remained notably silent, her jaw set in a way that anyone familiar with The View would recognize as trouble brewing. She occasionally glanced at her notes, but her eyes kept returning to Markle with an intensity that was almost unsettling. The camera occasionally caught her expression, and viewers at home could sense that something was building. When the show returned from its first commercial break, the atmosphere in the studio had shifted subtly. The warm-up period was over, and now it was time for the real conversation to begin. Whoopi transitioned to more serious topics, bringing up Markle's experiences with the British media and her decision to step back from royal duties. "That must have been an incredibly difficult decision," Whoopi said, her voice carrying the weight of genuine concern. "Can you tell us about what led to that moment when you realized you needed to make a change?" Markle's composure remained intact, but there was a flicker of something deeper in her eyes. "It was a gradual realization that the environment we were in wasn't sustainable for our family's well-being. The constant scrutiny, the way stories were being told, the impact it was having on our mental health. It all reached a point where we had to prioritize our family's safety and happiness." This was the opening Meghan McCain had been waiting for. She leaned forward slightly, her voice cutting through the sympathetic murmurs of the other hosts. "I find it interesting that you talk about stories being told when you and your husband have been quite vocal about telling your own stories through various media platforms. Isn't there a bit of contradiction there?" The question landed like a thunderbolt. Markle's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, but she maintained her composure. I think there's a difference between defending yourself against false narratives and sharing your authentic truth. We've always been careful to speak only about our own experiences. McCain wasn't satisfied with that answer. But when you go on a platform like Oprah and make claims about conversations regarding your son's skin color, you're not just sharing your experience. You're making accusations against people who can't defend themselves due to protocol. Don't you think that's a bit unfair? The studio fell silent. Even the usually chatty Joy Behar seemed stunned by the directness of the question. Markle's hands, which had been resting calmly in her lap, tensed slightly. When she spoke, her voice carried a steel that hadn't been there moments before. I think anyone who has experienced racism, particularly within an institution, has every right to speak their truth. The fact that there are protocols that prevent certain people from responding doesn't change the validity of that experience. McCain's eyes flashed with something that looked almost like satisfaction. She had drawn first blood, and everyone in the studio knew it. But without being able to hear the other side, how do viewers know what the complete truth is? Isn't it possible that context matters? The tension in the room was now undeniable. Whoopi tried to intervene, sensing that things were heading toward dangerous territory. Well, I think we can all agree that racism is never acceptable in any form. But McCain wasn't finished. Of course, racism is unacceptable. But I'm questioning whether every uncomfortable conversation about race is necessarily racist. Sometimes difficult topics require nuanced discussion. And when one side of that discussion is silenced, it's hard to know what really happened. Markle's composure finally began to crack. Her voice, when she responded, carried an edge that viewers had never heard before. I think when someone tells you they've experienced racism, especially within their own family, the appropriate response is to listen and learn, not to question their lived experience. The battle lines were drawn. What had started as a routine promotional interview had transformed into something much more significant. The two Meghans were now engaged in a verbal duel that would define both of their public personas for years to come. In the studio, the other hosts watched in fascination and horror as two master communicators prepared to tear each other apart on live television. McCain straightened in her chair, her political instincts fully engaged. She had found her target, and she wasn't about to let it go. I'm not questioning your experience. I'm questioning the way you've chosen to share it. When you make public accusations without providing context or allowing for response, you're not just telling your story. You're potentially damaging other people's reputations. The gloves were officially off. Markle's eyes narrowed as she prepared her response, and viewers across the country leaned forward in their seats. This was no longer an interview. This was a war of words between two women who represented very different approaches to fame, power, and responsibility. The real fireworks were just beginning. Markle's response came swift and calculated, her media training evident in every word. Meghan, I think you're conflating speaking truth with making accusations. When I shared my experience, I was careful to speak only about how those conversations made me feel, not to attack anyone personally. The fact that you're more concerned about protecting institutional reputation than addressing the harm caused by racist comments says quite a lot. McCain's laugh was sharp and humorless. Oh, please. You sat on the most watched television interview in years and painted an entire family and institution as racist while hiding behind carefully crafted language. That's not sharing feelings. That's character assassination with plausible deniability. The other hosts exchanged glances, clearly recognizing that this had moved far beyond normal daytime television discourse. Joy Behar attempted to lighten the mood with a joke, but neither Meghan was paying attention to her. Their focus was entirely on each other now, like two skilled fencers circling for the next strike. Character assassination? Markle's voice rose slightly, the first crack in her polished exterior. I shared my experience of being the only woman of color in that family and the isolation I felt. If you see that as an attack, maybe you should examine why hearing about racism makes you so uncomfortable. McCain seized on the emotional response immediately. Don't you dare try to make this about my comfort level with discussing race. I've been talking about difficult topics my entire career. What makes me uncomfortable is watching someone use their race as a shield against any criticism of their behavior. The accusation hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Whoopi finally stepped in, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had been navigating these waters for decades. Now hold on. Let's not go down that road. But McCain was in full attack mode now. No, Whoopi. I think this is exactly the road we need to go down. We're supposed to believe that every criticism of Meghan Markle is rooted in racism. But we can't question anything she says because that would be racist too. It's a convenient way to avoid accountability. Markle's composure finally shattered. Accountability? You want to talk about accountability? Let's talk about how you've built your entire career on being the angry conservative who says whatever controversial thing will get you attention. At least when I speak out, it's about something that matters. The studio fell deadly silent. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. McCain's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, anger, and then something that looked almost like respect for the directness of the attack. "Well, there's the real Meghan Markle," McCain said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Not the polished humanitarian, but the actress who knows exactly how to play a role. You've been sitting there for 20 minutes pretending to be above all this, but you're just as willing to throw punches as anyone else." "I'm not pretending anything," Markle shot back. "I'm trying to have a civilized conversation about serious issues, while you're trying to turn this into some kind of political performance. The difference is I actually care about the substance of what we're discussing." McCain's smile was razor-sharp. "Substance? You mean like when you claimed you didn't know anything about the royal family before you married into it? Or when you said you weren't prepared for the level of scrutiny despite being a working actress who had been in the public eye for years? Which version of Meghan Markle are we supposed to believe?" The attack was surgical in its precision. Markle's face flushed, and for a moment she seemed genuinely speechless. When she found her voice again, it carried a tremor of barely controlled fury. "You're taking things out of context to score cheap political points. I never said I knew nothing about the royal family. I said I wasn't prepared for the specific type of scrutiny that comes with being a working member of the royal family, particularly as a woman of color." "Everything comes back to race with you, doesn't it?" McCain pressed. "Can't you consider that maybe some of the criticism you faced was because of your actions, not your skin color? Or is that possibility too threatening to your narrative?" Sarah Haynes tried to jump in with a question about Markle's upcoming projects, clearly hoping to redirect the conversation. But neither woman was ready to back down. The professional courtesy that usually governed daytime television had completely evaporated. "My narrative?" Markle's voice was rising now, her careful media training finally cracking under the pressure. "My narrative is that I experienced racism, and I talked about it. If that threatens you, if that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe you need to ask yourself why." McCain leaned forward, her political instincts fully engaged. "What threatens me is the idea that we can't have honest conversations about complex issues because someone might claim racism. You've created a situation where anyone who disagrees with you is automatically a racist. That's not fighting racism, that's weaponizing it." The accusation was explosive, and everyone in the studio knew it. Sunny Hostin finally found her voice, trying to bring some perspective to the escalating conflict. "I think we need to be careful about how we frame these discussions. Both of you are making valid points, but we're losing sight of the bigger picture." But McCain wasn't finished. "The bigger picture is that we have someone who has made millions of dollars talking about how victimized she was by one of the most respected institutions in the world. And we're supposed to just accept everything she says without question because asking for evidence or context is somehow racist." Markle's response was immediate and biting. "The bigger picture is that people like you are more concerned about protecting institutions than protecting people. You're more upset about the royal family's reputation than you are about the fact that a woman of color was driven out of that family by racist treatment." "Driven out?" McCain's voice dripped with skepticism. "You left to sign multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify. You didn't flee persecution. You left for a better business opportunity. And there's nothing wrong with that, but let's not pretend it was some kind of heroic escape." The brutality of the assessment left Markle visibly shaken. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass, and when she spoke, her voice carried a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. "You have no idea what it was like to be in that situation. The pressure, the isolation, the constant attacks in the media. Money doesn't fix everything, Meghan." For just a moment, McCain's expression softened, as if she recognized the genuine pain in Markle's voice. But the moment passed quickly, and her political instincts took over again. "I'm not saying money fixes everything, but it does give you options that most people don't have. When you frame your story as if you were some kind of powerless victim, you're ignoring the incredible privilege you've had throughout this entire process." "Privilege?" Markle's voice was incredulous. You want to talk about privilege? You're the daughter of a war hero senator who literally got your job because of your last name. You've never had to worry about how your race might affect your career opportunities. Don't lecture me about privilege. The personal attack hit its mark. McCain's face darkened, and when she spoke, her voice carried a cold fury that made the studio feel even more tense than before. My father earned everything he achieved through service and sacrifice. And yes, his name opened doors for me, but I've had to prove myself every single day since. I didn't marry into my position and then spend years complaining about how hard it was. Complaining. Markle's composure was completely gone. Now, I shared my experience to help other women who might be going through similar situations. I used my platform to talk about mental health and the importance of seeking help. If you see that as complaining, then you completely missed the point. McCain's smile was cold and calculating. Oh, I got the point perfectly. You turned personal grievances into a brand. You monetized your victim story and sold it to the highest bidder. It's actually quite brilliant from a business perspective, but let's not pretend it was some kind of public service. The accusation was devastating in its simplicity. Markle sat in stunned silence for several seconds, her carefully constructed media persona crumbling in real time. When she finally found her voice, it was barely above a whisper, but it carried a steel that made everyone in the studio sit up straighter. You know what, Meghan? You're right about one thing. I did turn my experience into something profitable, because if I'm going to be attacked and criticized no matter what I do, I might as well make sure I have the resources to fight back. And unlike you, I'm not hiding behind Daddy's legacy while I do it. The mention of John McCain's legacy was the nuclear option, and everyone in the studio knew it. McCain's face went through a series of expressions: shock, rage, and then something that looked almost like admiration for the audacity of the attack. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet, it was almost a whisper, but it carried more menace than any scream. You want to bring my father into this? Really? The man who spent 5.5 years being tortured in a Vietnamese prison while you were probably getting acting lessons? The man who dedicated his entire life to serving this country? That's the angle you want to take. Markle realized immediately that she had crossed a line, but there was no backing down now. The damage was done, and the only way forward was through. I'm not attacking your father. I'm pointing out that you've benefited from nepotism while criticizing others for using their platforms. At least I earned my way into the royal family through my own relationship, not through family connections. McCain's laugh was bitter and sharp. Earned your way in? You mean you married a prince, and then spent the next few years complaining about how terrible it was? And now you're lecturing me about nepotism? You literally became a duchess by marriage, and you're talking about earning things. The hypocrisy of the accusation wasn't lost on anyone in the studio. Whoopi made one final attempt to regain control of the situation. Ladies, I think we need to step back and remember that we're here to have a productive conversation. But both women were far beyond the point of productive conversation. McCain continued her assault with surgical precision. You know what I think happened? I think you thought being a royal would be like playing a role in a movie. All glamour and adoration. But when you realized it required actual work, actual sacrifice, and that you couldn't control the narrative the way you could in Hollywood, you decided to take your ball and go home. Work. Sacrifice. Markle's voice was incredulous. You think I don't know about sacrifice? I gave up my career, my independence, my entire life to serve that institution. I followed every protocol, attended every event, smiled through every uncomfortable moment. And when I asked for help dealing with the mental health struggles that came with that pressure, I was told it would be bad for the family's image. McCain's response was immediate and brutal. Mental health struggles that coincidentally became public right around the time you were negotiating your exit strategy. How convenient that your breakdown happened to align perfectly with your business plans. The accusation was so callous, so dismissive of genuine mental health struggles, that even Joy Behar gasped audibly. Markle's face went pale, and for a moment, she seemed genuinely stunned by the cruelty of the attack. You're questioning my mental health struggles? Markle's voice was barely controlled. You're going to sit there and suggest that I fabricated suicidal thoughts for publicity? That's not just cruel, Meghan. It's dangerous. You're contributing to the stigma that prevents people from seeking help. McCain sensed she had gone too far. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. I'm not questioning your mental health. I'm questioning your timing. Everything you've done has been perfectly calculated for maximum impact, and minimum accountability. Even your pain is strategic. The studio fell into complete silence. Even the camera operators seemed to have stopped moving. Markle sat perfectly still for several seconds, her breathing shallow and controlled. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a deadly calm that was somehow more frightening than any scream. You know what, Meghan? You're absolutely right. I am strategic. I've had to be because women like me don't get the luxury of being messy or imperfect in public. We don't get to have our mistakes forgiven because of our family name or our connections. We have to be twice as good, twice as careful, and twice as strong. And if that makes me calculating, then I'll own that. McCain leaned back in her chair, clearly not expecting this response. Finally, some honesty. That's all I wanted. Just admit that this whole victim narrative is a performance. It's not a performance, Markle shot back. It's survival. You've never had to worry about how your race might affect your career prospects. You've never had to smile through racist comments from your own family members. You've never had to wonder if your children will be safe because of the color of their skin. So, don't you dare tell me that my response to those experiences is somehow invalid. McCain's political instincts kicked in, and she went for the jugular. And there it is again. Every criticism becomes about race. Every difficult conversation. You've made it impossible to have a genuine discussion about anything because you've weaponized your own experience. Weaponized. Markle's voice rose to a level that made everyone in the studio uncomfortable. I shared my truth about racism because other women needed to hear it. I talked about mental health because people are dying from suicide. I spoke about the importance of authenticity because too many people are living lies to protect other people's comfort. If that's weaponizing my experience, then I'm proud to be armed. The passion in her voice was undeniable, and for a moment, even McCain seemed affected by it. But she recovered quickly, her political training taking over. That's a beautiful speech, but it doesn't change the fact that you've built an empire on grievance. You've turned complaint into content and trauma into a business model, and you've turned cruelty into entertainment. Markle fired back. You've made a career out of being the mean girl who says what everyone else is thinking. At least my business model helps people. What does yours do except spread more hate? McCain's smile was sharp and predatory. My business model is honesty. I say what I think even when it's uncomfortable. I don't hide behind carefully crafted victim narratives or use my identity as a shield against criticism. I take responsibility for my words and actions. Responsibility? Markle's laugh was bitter. You just spent the last 30 minutes attacking my mental health, my marriage, my parenting, and my career. You've questioned my experiences with racism and suggested I'm lying about suicidal thoughts. If that's your idea of responsibility, then I'll stick with being a victim. The exchange had reached a fever pitch, and both women were now completely unrestrained. McCain leaned forward, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. You want to know what I really think? I think you're exactly what's wrong with modern celebrity culture. You want all the benefits of fame without any of the responsibility. You want to be praised for your courage while hiding from any real accountability. You're not a victim. You're a manipulator. Markle's response was immediate and devastating. And you're exactly what's wrong with modern political discourse. You think being cruel is the same as being honest. You think tearing people down is the same as building something up. You're not brave, Meghan. You're just mean. And the saddest part is you think that's something to be proud of. The final exchange hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Both women sat back in their chairs, breathing heavily, the adrenaline of the confrontation still coursing through their systems. The other hosts looked shell-shocked, clearly unsure how to proceed after witnessing such a brutal verbal battle. Whoopi finally found her voice, though it was shaky and uncertain. Well, I think we've certainly covered a lot of ground here today. We need to take a break, but when we come back, we'll be talking about lighter topics. But nobody was thinking about lighter topics. The damage had been done, and both women knew it. McCain had succeeded in rattling Markle's composed exterior, but in doing so, she had revealed a cruelty that would haunt her own reputation. Markle had fought back with equal ferocity. Her carefully constructed image as a gracious humanitarian had been irreparably damaged. As they cut to commercial, both Meghans sat in stunned silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over them like a heavy blanket. Neither had won this battle, but both had lost something essential in the process. The confrontation that was supposed to be about truth and accountability had become something uglier. A display of two powerful women tearing each other apart for the entertainment of millions. The cameras stopped rolling, but the damage was done. This wasn't just a heated television debate. It was a cultural moment that would be analyzed and discussed for years to come. Two women, both named Meghan, had entered that studio as complex, flawed, but ultimately human figures. They left as cautionary tales about what happens when personal grievances become public spectacle. The real question wasn't who had won or lost, but what the cost of this victory would be. In a world where every word is scrutinized and every emotion is commodified, both women had learned the hard way that sometimes the most honest thing you can do is the most damaging thing you can do. The truth, as it turns out, is rarely as clean or as satisfying as we want it to be. And with that sobering reality hanging over everything, the most explosive confrontation in daytime television history finally came to its brutal, messy, and ultimately human conclusion. That's the story of how two of the most powerful women in media destroyed each other on live television, and why sometimes the most honest conversations are the most dangerous ones to have. What do you think? Did McCain go too far with her attacks?